The State of Crypto is presented by Tron, connecting the world to the power of cryptocurrency.
What is your take on the Celsius news?
This is interesting. The timing is really the interesting part. This is a case that was already brought by the New York Attorney General. We've had the examiner reporting on, the shenanigans. The company is in bankruptcy. So the question I ask is, who really is benefiting from the SEC charging in here?
I guess they couldn't just leave that box unchecked, right? If they're going after all these other companies, right? And then there's Celsius, right? I guess they just have to check the box, right?
That's what it appears to be, because we've got, reportedly criminal authorities have swept in and arrested Mashinsky. So this is one of those cases. And I'm sorry to say, we see this too often with regulators where they just feel like they have to bring a case just to say that they brought a case and have that as,
In their defense, though, that's kind of true, right? There's no way they could be going after, Coinbase, for example, because somebody's going to say, what about Celsius, right? How could you go after these guys, not those guys? So it's kind of a legitimate thing, right? They couldn't really just leave Celsius out there.
I'm thinking about it in terms of, sometimes the CFTC brings a case and the SEC jumps on as, Me Too. We get state regulators jumping in when we have federal regulators in doing Me Too. So it rings a little bit of Me Too. But I understand, the SEC as the regulator of the securities industry would look a little sheepish. And frankly, they probably held off on filing their case at the behest of the Department of Justice. So they may have had a case in the hopper for quite some time, but just held it so that they could coordinate their filing with criminal authorities' action.
Let's switch gears here and talk about Coinbase. We just kind of unpacked what's going on this morning with Jack Schickler in our previous segment. What do you think of Coinbase's new argument here?
Well, Coinbase makes an argument that, is really a good one for them. The Supreme Court is talking a lot now about the major questions doctrine. And, that means they're going back and looking at legislation that enables administrative agencies to act. And they're saying exactly what does that legislation authorize. And if it doesn't specifically authorize these actions that the agency or the government has taken, and those actions constitute a major question, then that isn't authorized. We have to kick this back to Congress. Here we've got the political football of crypto regulation. We have and I think Coinbase does a great job of laying this out in terms of, first asking the SEC to engage in rulemaking. Next, hearing that getting a Wells notice and filing a writ of mandamus, basically going into court and saying, hey, this is a major question. The SEC should do rulemaking before they take any action. And now the SEC has taken action, and the SEC's position is, look, we can engage in rulemaking at the same time that we are whacking industry participants under what we say the current law is. What Coinbase is saying is that is not legal. You cannot be suing entities like us, and that would include Ripple, under a theory that is not, or under using a power that is not expressly authorized by your current statutes. And by the way, nobody was thinking about crypto back when, the Securities Act was passed in 1933, or the Securities Exchange Act was passed in 1934. So here we've got this tension, though, because we have the SEC saying, look, these are flexible standards. We have the Howey test. This was meant to be flexible. We go back and we look at congressional intent, and it's meant to be flexible. But the Supreme Court is saying now, well, not that flexible. So, this is a shift. And what's interesting is, as Congress, for decades, has enacted laws in the securities area, certainly Congress has deferred a lot to the SEC to make these kinds of determinations because, securities is a pretty complicated area. And now you have the Supreme Court stepping in and saying, but wait, we don't like that when there's a major question that comes up. So we have this clash between what Congress thought the court would be doing when it enacted, Dodd-Frank and Sarbanes-Oxley and all these other statutes, and what the Supreme Court says today they meant, because they didn't mean that at the time, or at least they didn't know that they meant that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Ripple and a lack of rulemaking, because with the lack of rulemaking, the entire industry is looking for precedent to be set in many of these cases. Could a result in Ripple, which we are expecting in September, change the trajectory of the Coinbase case? Could we see it get resolved much faster than the years that you outlined?
I don't think so. And the reason is a ruling in the Ripple case would merely be a ruling by a district court judge. And that's not going to be satisfying to whichever party loses the Ripple case. So there certainly would be, I think, an appeal there. And it's certainly not going to satisfy whichever party doesn't benefit by it, SEC or Coinbase, in this case. So when you have multiple cases proceeding sort of in parallel, not against the same parties, but the SEC is the same party. Certainly the SEC and Coinbase will talk about that ruling. It will be relevant. It's something that the court hearing the Coinbase case should know about, but it's not binding precedent. The only thing that would bind and require a particular ruling in the Southern District of New York would be a ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court or the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Those are the bosses of the judges in the Southern District of New York.
Lisa, let's just turn to another topic quickly. Just very confusing moment, because we also have all these spot ETF applications. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think those are going to go through?
I have no idea these days what's going to go through.
Yeah.
Everything is up in the air right now. I think the CFTC, the SEC, everybody's sort of, reconsidering. It's been interesting to see through Coinbase's answer and in its writ and in all the filings that it's made, the detailed process that it went through in order to, do its initial filing as a direct offering, and in pursuing, the rest of its business. So I'm just completely puzzled about what the SEC is going to do, what the CFTC is going to do. And Congress, I'd be delighted if Congress took action, but this is complicated and it's not necessarily something Congress is going to figure out. That's an awful lot of people who have to come to an agreement, not all of them, but a majority. And it's great that we have, bipartisan legislation being proposed, but there's so much disagreement. And I think the industry and Congress agree that we should be able to go after bad actors. I think that's, nobody's disputing that. But the question is, what about the actors who are trying to find a legal way to operate? We have so many people who want to be in crypto. And we have, a regulatory system that is just tied up in knots.
All right, Lisa, I can tell you, you're not our only guest who said they are puzzled over this. So we'll have to wait and see what happens next. We're going to leave
also puzzled. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to leave that there. Lisa, thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you.